Good afternoon. Welcome to Talk HR UK with me, Simon Geere. I'm here today to talk to Peter Waller, who's come from Air Navigation Solutions. I've known Peter many years. I think I met him when he worked at GB Airways. And Peter's worked throughout aviation with a couple of big diversions in the middle of that, but he's back in that space now. And he's very kindly agreed to give us some time today to really talk about a lot of interesting things about his current organisation where he's working. It's a nice spin on this story today. I actually started working with Air Navigation Solutions before Peter was technically employed by them. So I was working with the MD on some temporary HR work, and then Peter joined, and it was great to learn about this organisation's story. It's something that affects all of us. Anyone that likes to fly is going to have come across your services at some point. So with no further ado, Peter, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Give us, I suppose, initially a company overview of Air Navigation Solutions, who you are, what you do.
Okay, so where do you start with that? So ANSL, so we are, as you say, an air service provider. So we provide air traffic control provision to a number of airports. We are relatively new, so the business has been running probably 5 years now, and we kind of hit the market with a bit of a bang, I guess. So our parent company is DFS. So DFS are the main air traffic service provider for Germany, and the biggest ANSP being Air Navigation Service Provider, the license that we hold to be able to provide these services in Europe. And so with the backing of DFS, we won the Gatwick contract from NATS. So NATS are historically the DFS equivalent for the UK, used to be government owned, and do all the air traffic control for all the upper airspace, so all the en route traffic, anything flying over the UK airspace or flying into the UK airspace, and have also historically done air traffic control for all the major infrastructure airports in the UK. The smaller regional airports tend to do it in-house and have their air traffic control services as part of the in-house establishment. But the major airports, the major infrastructure airports, have historically been with NATS, and that's really the way the market's been for decades, until ANS appeared, and as I say, with the backing of DFS, won the Gatwick contract from NATS, and then also won the Edinburgh contract, and we're now also working on another number of other contracts. So really interesting because it's the first time that a commercial contract's been won in that way in the UK. So how we set that up and how we did that was a kind of a bit of a spotlight for the industry of would this work and was a transition possible in that way. And I think we've demonstrated that has been the case, because the service provision at Gatwick and at Edinburgh has I think been seamless, albeit there's been challenges internally and how that works, and huge challenges to overcome from a customer point of view. As a passenger going through the airport, I don't think you would have necessarily noticed that transition. So interesting times, and certainly from trying to set up a business in that case, winning a huge contract like Gatwick presents hundreds of challenges. As you can imagine, air traffic control is highly regulated, as you would very much hope. It's
Indeed.
highly safety conscious, and so the regulations and the processes that you have to set up just to be able to operate are extensive, and take huge amounts of work to get that operational, functional, compliant, and safe. And safety is obviously the key of everything we do, moving thousands of people around the country every day as we do. So highly rewarding in that way, because it's highly professional. The group of staff we have a fantastic expertise. Obviously, a lot of those staff transitioned from NATS, having expected to work for NATS, probably their careers, because that was really the only option for them. And so having a different player in the market has presented different options, and it's been interesting to see how that us breaking into the market has changed it. I mean, NATS are obviously a fantastic organisation. They're a world benchmark organisation, and a fantastic for what they do. And so coming in and working within that marketplace, and I guess beginning to liberalise it a little bit. While the market was technically privatised a long time ago, it was probably never liberalised. So we've now done that transition, and I guess the questions are, having successfully done 2 transitions and shown that they can work, what's next for us, and how does that materialise, and how do we kind of look to move the market forward?
Excellent. So it's such a different organisation, quite unique. So to take it right back to the beginning. So my understanding when I was talking with Henry was when DFS as such won the contract, the organisation didn't really exist in a
Yeah.
huge sense. So you obviously had to, someone's done a great bit of work there selling an organisation that doesn't exist, and I applaud them. But what were the challenges for you? I mean, how far down that line had ANS got by the time you arrived, if you know what I mean?
So yeah, so I mean, huge amounts of work. I mean, I joined the business. Has been running for about 5 years. We've had the contract for about 5 years. There was a initial piece of the business existing prior to the transition, so we could get set up ready for the transition after the contract award. I've been in the business 2 years, so I missed that beginning part of the setup of the company. But the decision early on was to set us up as a UK independent company. So whilst we have the backing and the support of a huge air traffic service provider in DFS behind us, and we are a UK company in our own right with our own board of directors, etc. And on top of that, we are an ANSP, so we have our own license as ANS, not just off the back of DFS. So to become an ANSP, to get the CAA, to get everything in place to be able to be approved, you have to put huge amounts in place, and a lot of that is procedures, expertise, compliance with regulation, all manuals, all the things that are needed to run a service as we run. So the focus, quite rightly, was initially getting all of those things in place to become compliant, to work with the regulator, to work with the airport, and to work with the airlines and the staff ultimately he transferred to us, and then obviously bringing in our own staff to boost the numbers of what we do. But none of it's straightforward because it is so heavily regulated. So even if you take the journey of an air traffic controller, it'll take them probably a year in college to train, and there's only very few colleges that train on a UK licensed air traffic controller. So historically, it's only been NATS who would train for their own staff, and then a provider that provides for the rest of the market, which is a training provider, Global ATS. So we've set up our academy over in Germany, utilising the DFS Academy and the simulators that they have over there. But we've set up a kind of our own ANS area of that, so we can train UK rated controllers. So we're only one of 3 providers that can do that now. So it's setting up all of those things so that we can kind of run the operation. I guess that's where the focus was the first few years, of getting that operation running, getting everything in place so it could run safely, and that transition could be safe, and the staff could work within the manuals and the procedures that they needed to operate, and we could satisfy the CAA. So that was probably the very first couple of years, was setting all of those things up. We then quickly won the Edinburgh contract, so you quickly move into a second transition, and there should be a 2-year build into a transition. So again, setting up all the manuals and doing that transition right. And we obviously took lots of learnings from the Gatwick experience into the Edinburgh experience, and I think that transition certainly behind the scenes was not without challenges, but certainly smoother, and a lot of the challenges that were faced at Gatwick, and there's still some historic legacy things that we're still dealing with from that transition at Gatwick, but certainly at Edinburgh, we learned a lot of lessons there, and that was a much better process. But we're still really focusing on an operation. So I see the journey of the business as setting up an operation for Gatwick, then setting up a multi-site operation, taking in Edinburgh. But really, I think probably the last few years has been around transitioning those operations into organisations. So setting up the company of ANS rather than just setting up the operation to comply with the services that you need to deliver. So the last couple of years have been really about setting up the infrastructure around that, so we can do all the basic things you need to do effectively. So payroll and and finances and HR and project management and governance and audit, and all the things that are needed to make sure we've got appropriate oversight on the units that are running. We've got appropriate governance and business functions behind it to make sure that kind of basic level of function can happen. And then we've also got the infrastructure around us to be able to grow the business further. I mean, I joined the business, I guess, for 2 reasons, maybe 3. I knew the MD, as you mentioned, Henry, a second ago. I knew the MD, so that was attractive. I'd worked with Henry previously, and was happy to work with him again. And so that was part of it. But really, the attraction to the company was the ability to grow an organisation. And throughout my career, I've been in SMEs most of my career, and have seen that kind of high growth, and I enjoy that, seeing that growth come through an organisation, and how that the business organisation structures change, and how we manage that. It's quite a dynamic situation. Plus, when it's growing in that way, you can see your impact and fingerprints all over it, and I enjoy seeing that back at me, whether it's directly or indirectly through other people or whatever that may be. So I've always been in those high growth organisations, so that was attractive, and certainly having joined the business, the opportunity is bigger than I probably thought it was when I came on, in terms of where the market sits and how ANS can really help impact that. And I think we've probably had an impact on the market already in terms of winning 2 contracts, and probably had an influence on price points and how customers view air traffic services and how that can be done. I think we've now got to look at it from what do airports need and how can we support them, especially in this climate where regulations are increasing. If anything, we'll see what the impact of Brexit is on that as well. But certainly, there's been a huge raft of regulations that have come across and impacted air traffic services. The equipment that we use, a lot of it is in need of replacement, and the assets replacing coming up. You've then got technology change, so you've got things like remote towers where air traffic control can be done remotely, not within the airport. You've got the impact of drones and how that impacts the market, and there are things in the air that need to be controlled that aren't currently. So all these things are happening. Plus the price points it's an expensive service to have if you're an airport operator, and obviously in this climate you're being massively hit in your revenues because of COVID. And we've seen that prior to COVID. We've seen airlines struggling. We've seen airlines going out of business and that was earlier on the year before anything to do with COVID. So the market's under strain. So I think within all those market dynamics and drivers, there's got to be a place for us in that to really understand what the airports need and support them and tailor our services for what they require. And that's how we're trying to shape ourselves. We're not trying to be, we're not trying to be all things to everybody. We're trying to understand what people need and not just say, we'll take your services on and outsource them to us, but understand what you need, because we can probably deliver that, whether it's training of your staff, whether it's engineering services, whether it's asset replacements of your key equipment, whether it's literally looking at how we can support the development of your airport. So all these things that these smaller airports that do it in-house specifically probably can't achieve on their own. So I say, but it's building trust and doing all those things that we do. So that was one of my reasons to join it, was growth. And the other was culturally, I thought it was an interesting challenge. So, most of the staff, as I said, transitioned from NATS, probably hadn't had that choice to transition and probably saw themselves working for NATS for the rest of their careers. And so, how you take this fantastically skilled professional workforce, but create a culture for a business that's different to the one they've been at, but one that they aspire to be in. So, ANS as an established business with 2 major contracts and other projects on the side, but as a new company, whilst we're new and we're young and we're dynamic and we're wanting to grow in this market, what does that mean from an employer brand and who we are and who we employ and working for? And so coming in to help establish that and create that identity for ANS is a really interesting challenge. And that's obviously something I've worked on a lot of my career. In my previous company, we worked a lot on the culture. I'm very proud of the culture that we created there, and it still exists there. And we're doing that same thing now. But a lot of that goes back to what I was saying previously about making sure we've got the business functions right, because staff have got to trust you first and foremost, and unless you have that stuff right, they don't. So if you're not paying them properly, or if things aren't working properly, or if they're not getting the letters, or if they're not getting the responses, or people aren't replying to their emails, or that breaks your trust. And so you've got to have that say-do piece close together. And if you're saying we're this and they're not feeling that, especially when they've had a couple of years of this transition where not everything's been perfect, because it can't be through that transition period, and they've had huge amounts of challenges with resources and everything else that they're working through. You've got to try and put that things in place, but it takes time because they've got to trust you first. So hence the focus on the administration functions. And now we're into the stage where we've got our structure right around that company, and we're probably into our 3rd iteration of what that next development level is. But we're moving into all the things of the manager's training and development succession planning and all these things, putting the key elements in place that make people want to work for you. So we've launched engagement surveys every 6 weeks. As I say, the first thing we wanted to put in was the managers training. So all of our watch managers and so air traffic control, if you can imagine, in a control tower, works on watches. So we have 5 watch managers obviously working through 24-hour shifts,
Right.
6 on 4 off. So those watch managers are really the key to the staff, because you don't get to see the touch points with the staff aren't huge, because when they come in, they plug in, and they're talking to airplanes, and there's no real time to actually see them when they do. And they could be on nights, or they could be on 4 days rest, or they could be on whatever it may be. So the watch managers are key, and the same with the engineering managers, again, with the engineers being on rotation on rosters. So getting to those managers and giving them the confidence and the support to be the managers you want them to be, and giving them not just the capability and the confidence and the skills, but working with them so they understand their place in that. So we've launched management development training for all of them, because my fundamental belief in anything, and this is not from me, I'm sure I've heard this from somewhere else, is, you work for a horrible boss, you have a horrible time at work, however great your company is, and equally, you can, the other way around works as well. You can work for a great boss in a horrible company and have a good time at work. So that line manager employee relationship is key. So I think our managers are very good. I don't think they've necessarily had the training in the past to give them the support they need. So how we set up our HR services around that as well is key. So we have, let's say, we put them all through 12-month training program, and part of that is working with their HR partner, and they have monthly kind of people review sessions, we call it, with each HR, with their HR partner, each manager, where they go through all the people stuff. So you're planning what's coming. So whether that's performance, whether that's grievances, whether that's recruitment, whether that's probation reviews, whether that's absence, all the stuff that would fit into that. You're reviewing that on a monthly basis, and you're planning it through, rather than just letting things fester and not dealing with things, and so they then bubble up to the top. You're proactively managing it, the same as we've implemented monthly one-to-ones with all staff to make sure that those touch points are happening. So it's getting those foundation points in place, I suppose, and we've done that over the last couple of years.
It's such a challenge, isn't it? I mean, when you stand back and think about it, it's a brand new organisation that you've had to set up. It's, as you say, you've taken on staff from a very large, established kind of life business, job for life type place. And yeah, as you say, these people are extremely obviously have to be extremely focused on what they do. You've got less chance to interact with them and do that people side of things. So from the HR challenges are pretty epic.
Yeah, and then you've got all the union side as well. So it's a heavily unionised organisation. So, building the trust and the relationships with the union is key, and that's paid off massively. I mean, you look at the work we've done through COVID, and I'm sure we'll come to COVID, but the relationship we've had with the union has allowed us to really do some flexible things with the staff in what would normally be a very rigid and unflexible environment. And so, but that can only come down with the dialogue and the relationship you've got with the union. So that's been something we've worked on a lot. There's a huge amount to it. The analogy I like as well is it was actually one of my union reps said this to me, and I think it really works for air traffic controllers. It's a very people talk about stress. It's a very pressurized job. So it's actually, when it's not a stressful environment, it's actually very calm when you go into a control tower. It's very calm, it's very quiet, and they don't want any distraction, because they're focusing on multidiscipline, talking to maybe 15, 20 airplanes at any one time and ensuring there's no conflict in any of those things. So they have to be fully focused and in the zone of what they're doing. And so it's very intense, especially in somewhere. Well, both of our airports are busy airports, but especially somewhere like Gatwick, where you're dealing with 950 movements a day. So pretty much in the height of summer, something taking off or landing pretty much every minute. And then you've got the bit that people don't think about, which is the aircraft on the ground. So the 20 aircraft moving around to get to the runway or to get to the stand, making sure there's no conflict there. So highly intensive job, and obviously highly skilled professional individuals fulfilling it. And the analogy he gave was, he said, you've got to think about it like someone going to hospital. So if I go to hospital to visit a relative that's ill, obviously that's quite a stressful environment, because I'm in hospital, which is an alien place, and it's not where someone wants to be, and someone I love is very ill, and so that creates stress. So all of that stuff is really difficult to deal with, but because you expect it, you deal with it. It's the stuff outside of that causes you the stress. So it's when you can't park your car, or when you can't find the room that you're trying to go to, or so it's the little minor things outside of the major stress things that are there that actually cause you the stress. And I think that analogy works quite well for air traffic control. That they deal with this stuff that they're dealing with. They come in every shift, but it's when the little things outside of that aren't in place, that is frustrating. So, whether that's the restroom isn't good, or whatever it may be, and it's understanding those issues and trying to make sure we correct them. Hence why we've put the 6 weekly engagement surveys in place, so we can really monitor and manage that, and really give people an opportunity to have their say and to be heard.
Excellent. Well, I was going to ask on that. I mean, as you say, you've come in, you've had to put in, and it's the part of HR that's often really overlooked and poo-pooed, but the transactional end. But that's key, because without that, the hygiene factors, is clearly defined, and that all needs to work. People need to get paid. They need to have all those mechanisms. And you're clearly a very commercial HR person who's understands exactly how the business works. You're not just in it for the people side. That's always come across before this role, but I think perhaps never more so than in this opportunity, because it's a very technical environment, isn't it? But I mean, looking at those perhaps softer but more strategic ends of HR, you mentioned the surveys. I think that's fantastic. So there are regular surveys taking place. You've got the basic, sort of performance reviews, one-to-ones, etc. Are there other areas of HR that you're looking to kind of grow as the business grows and things settle down?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to do it in a step-by-step way, as you say. So I mean, I kind of see it as a 3-tier triangle or pyramid, or however you want to do it. So yeah, you've got your basic administration functions. You've got to pay people properly. They've got to be responded to appropriately. You've got to have the right processes and systems in place, and you've got to be able to deal with whatever comes up, performance management, sickness management, whatever. Because if you don't have that, then you've got no foundation. So I always kind of start there. It's not where I want to be or play, but you've got to get that right. And then you go into the transactional level, so making sure that people are treated fairly and properly, and they understand how they will be dealt with, and they can see everyone around them as being treated fairly. So I guess there's a building up of trust, and that can be dealing with, even how you're dealing with disciplinaries, how we're dealing with communication, how we're dealing with the sickness management. So all that transactional stuff that goes on. And as I say, I've worked in enough HR departments where they're too firefighty and responding to stuff, and I try and set up the way that is much more proactive, as I say, with these people review sessions, with people having one-to-ones. Those two functions are key for me. So you get that transitional bit right, then you can start playing in the, for me anyway, how I think about it, then you can start playing in the more progressive strategic stuff. And for me, that's culture. But again, culture is really about how you're treated every day. So if you haven't got that stuff below, you haven't got anything. So you can say and have a shiny poster as much as you want, but if people aren't feeling it, then if anything, it detracts from stuff. So I'm much more around how people feel and are responded to and engaged with. And so I suppose as a management team, we make a stand for how we interact with people, and making sure everybody is kind of celebrated for their unique things that they bring to the organisation. And we've got a highly skilled workforce, and within that you sometimes have some highly challenging individuals too, because the nature of the intelligence of the people that you're dealing with in a lot of ways. So it's really understanding that. And I've definitely had to have a shift of an understanding in joining ANS of I've always tried to see things through our staff's point of view, and therefore understand it and have that kind of look at it from an empathy point of view. But it's a very different strain when you're controlling thousands of people every day, and the impact of things not being right is far wider. So it's very easy to it's very easy to make sure you're in that mindset, and then if you see it through that lens, you can understand why maybe someone's reacting to something in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect them to. So that's why we then work within the cultural piece. We work within the structure. So our structure as a growing business will change every 18 months, and it's getting people to appreciate that. So often people just see a organizational chart and think, oh, where's my career move here, because it's quite a small company, and I can't see my manager moving on for another couple of years, so where am I going to go? And I think, well, you're not seeing the picture here, because that org chart will be completely different in 18 months time, and actually you can influence where that goes and how it comes. And so it's getting people to understand the dynamics of that, and actually how that can create far more opportunity, and that you're not pigeonholed into some small piece of a puzzle somewhere, but you've got the scope to really take it on. So that's where we're just launching that now with the development succession review planning process, so people can really start having personal development plans in place of where they want to go, and we can really help achieve that. So it's those kind of things, but the structure is key. And I think one of the biggest successes we've had over the last couple of years is defining what our structure should be and bringing in some really good people into the organisation, and people with not just expertise from within industry, but people with expertise from outside of industry, which I think makes us a bit unique. So we've brought in some people, whether it be from I guess linked industries like airlines, but equally people from completely outside industry. So I think we've got a really good makeup of a senior management team, and then the teams below it, and that will continue to evolve as the company grows and evolves too. So yeah, those are probably the key things.
Well, it's a really exciting journey that you're on. I mean, from such as you say, from such small beginnings, really, in terms of numbers of people. So we obviously have to touch on COVID. I think it would be silly not to, particularly as of all the industries it's affected, clearly aviation and airlines it's got to be up there as number one, or joint number one. So how was it for you? I mean, I suspect you were probably ahead of the curve of a lot of organisations in terms of seeing the impact and having to start planning how it all worked. But what happened?
Yeah, I think I mean, we took the stand from the outset that we wanted to come out of this stronger. And I think in some ways we'll do that. I think as you say, the industry's been decimated, and every day now we've got Croatia this morning. The quarantine rules change, and so the consumer confidence just drops through the floor, and obviously that impacts the airlines, and in turn impacts our customers, which is the airports. So we're not immune to that. We're a significant cost to the airport operators, and so if they're not having any revenue, and whilst they look at passenger numbers, when you look at aircraft numbers, the impact is effectively the same. If you take somewhere like Gatwick, I mean, Gatwick should be having 950 movements at the moment, and it's probably having somewhere about 250. And at the height of the pandemic, I think there was one day where it had 4 movements. So that's 2 planes going in and out, which is just crazy. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And the knock on to that into the industry is unimaginable, really. So really, we're looking at the recovery of how long that's going to take, whether that's 3 years, 4 years. But one of our limitations is because it takes so long to train a controller and an air traffic engineer, that we've got to think relatively long term. We can't do anything knee-jerk, really, because if there was a requirement to cut costs significantly, it would take us a very long time to recover those people. So if an airport's looking at their passenger numbers dropping through the floor, but then recovering over a 3-year period, we've got to be ahead of that recovery by about 2 years probably, because as I say, it takes them a year to train to get your license, but then it will take you up to a year to get validated at that particular airport as well. So we could bring in the most qualified controller in the world, but it would still take them a year to validate at Gatwick.
Right. Okay.
So the whole journey is about 2 years, and we, as I say, with our academy in Germany, we try and train our own, and provide those opportunities. And so if it's a 3-year recovery plan, we've got to, and we were to make a hit in our resources, we've got to be recovering and planning 2 years ahead. So it would only really be a year, and a lot of it is understanding that, and making sure that we don't then have a second knock on to an airport that stifles their growth because we haven't got the resources to deliver it. So we've made the stand quite early on that we would look to protect jobs and protect terms and conditions as much as we can, and stand up for the business that we've built over the last couple of years. But that's had challenges, and we've obviously worked with our unions, and we've worked with our airports to try and support them through this process, and deliver what we can deliver, whilst understanding the context of the limitations that we've got as well. But a lot of the other stuff, I think we've responded, all the stuff you're hearing from every organisation around working from home and the challenges that faces, we were set up for that. I think we've had a complete shift in mindset of how I certainly was someone that went into the office 5 days a week. I can't see I'll ever do that again. So we've definitely had a shift in mindset to that, but the technical ability to do it, we were set up, and that was not a problem. We put in place team meetings every morning at 9 o'clock. So just to keep people social and keep people interactive, and to make sure people were engaged in what they were doing, and that work was being monitored. So I think that helps. And off the back of that, individual teams did loads of things, fancy dress and quizzes and pub quizzes and God knows whatever else.
Yeah.
We had exercise classes going on, but we really upped the communication, and I think that was key. So when the pandemic hit, we were doing comms every day, written comms literally every day of what the latest update is and what the impact is and how that's working. We then we then did a weekly live cast on top of that. So Henry, the MD, and potentially someone else talking on a weekly live cast to the business, as well as the daily comms. And then eventually that's kind of shortened, and we're now on a fortnightly live cast and a fortnightly sway, which is like an internal magazine, online magazine, which just basically gives updates on what every department's doing, because you haven't got that interaction in the same way. So everyone can see what's still going on across business. So communication's been really key. And the same things, we've furloughed staff where we've had to, and we've looked at some terms and conditions and worked with the unions on flexibilities around roster and how we just have the skeleton team in because the traffic volumes are far less, but what we do with the other staff, and what we've tried to do is really progress things that maybe we haven't been able to progress outside of this period, because we have suddenly got resources available to us, because we don't need them all in the operation controlling planes all the time. So we've really progressed of reviewing a lot of our procedures and making sure our investigations are right, and all the things that go on in the background have come more to the foreground, so we can improve them effectively.
That's interesting. And forgive me, obviously I'm a novice here, but so the air traffic controllers themselves, they're still in the towers, I'm assuming, from in a socially distanced way, or are they they're not working from home, so to speak?
No. So throughout this, you can't. So from a controller point of view, you have to be in position and have the visual control and the systems that you couldn't have outside of the tower. Currently, there are digital towers that do exist, but not very many. So they've been operating throughout this whole process, albeit there's not been as many planes for them to operate, so it's been less pressure on them in that sense. But that in itself can create challenges, because we've got to look at, as the traffic volume starts to increase, how we ensure we're maintaining their competency to control at that level. It's very difficult. It's very different for someone to come in from an airport, say a smaller regional airport, into Gatwick, because the volume of traffic is so much higher. You don't have thinking time in the same way. So you're just responding so much quicker all the time. You don't have time to sit back and pause. It's constant. So getting controllers to ensure that they're competent at that level is key. And obviously all of our controllers at Gatwick are there. But when the traffic suddenly dropped from 900 to 100 or to 50, how you make sure that they maintain that as the traffic starts to build again. So we've done a lot of work with the regulator and utilising our simulators to simulate that traffic level, so we can keep that competency running. But they've been working throughout, albeit as more of a skeleton crew than the full-on crew that you would normally have based on the traffic volumes that we've had. And then I say the controllers that aren't controlling, we've utilised to work on projects and to progress projects in a way that maybe outside of COVID we would have had to bring in extra people to do those. We can now use the experts we already have in the business.
That's great. And you raise an interesting point there, and I think in our conversation before today, we discussed this yesterday. These kind of learned skills and how the experience levels are dropping. I mean, so clearly in your field that can't happen. You've got the simulators available, and job's done, kind of thing. But the number of people we're talking about, skill sets changing with this heightened working from home, and people's not necessarily ability to interact, but their concentration, their ability to multitask. I mean, certainly I find I never used to realise interruptions existed. Now I really notice when I'm being interrupted, and you think, if this goes on much longer, am I really going to be that grumpy old man in the office? And it's there's an awful lot of skills I think we've taken for granted that will need honing again, as we are able to move back to a more split working pattern, I suppose.
And it's a very complex system in airport as well. So if you think of the parties that interact with each other to make that work, whether it's the ground handlers, the pilots, the aircraft crew, the tug crew, et cetera, plus the controllers, all of those things have to interact seamlessly. And there's a huge system of work that allows that to happen safely. but there is, especially if you look at, so it's not just the controllers, it's the whole airport that we're controlling effectively. So if you think of ground handlers and tug crews that have been in and out of furlough through this period, and they've come back to work and they've had 2 months off, but some of the procedures have changed, or the pushback from that stand procedures changed, or whatever it may be, or there's a bit of work going on in the airport, so you can't go into that taxiway now. When you're in it day to day, that's fine, but there's certainly a danger that it creates more risk. So how each of those components have worked through that, and I know with airlines they have used a lot of a lot of work in their simulators as well, and so, but from a controller's point of view, you've got to be aware of those things and be aware of making sure that the instructions you're giving out to the tug crews, to the different agencies on the airport are clear and concise, which they always are, but bearing with that context in mind as well. So just being even more mindful and vigilant than you'd normally be, which, to be honest, is pretty much impossible, because I've never worked anywhere where anyone's been as mindful and vigilant as they are, and the safety systems that are in place are phenomenal. But yeah, it's certainly something we're conscious of, and that's why we've looked at working with the regulator, working with our simulators and our trainers, and doing and putting those things in place, albeit within the constraints of how do you do that socially distanced, how do you and all the things you just touched on, especially when you're working with a trainee trainer. So we've had to look at a lot of things around equipment that we use, and screens put up between positions, and all those kind of things. Nice. And cleaning, and people using the different own silences and wipe down procedures and everything else.
Okay. Well, I've got 2 final questions for you, Peter. I mean, one about the business, and one about HR, I suppose. So answer them in either order. But I think for the organisation, for ANS, what's next? And I know this is a very, it's a strange time, and it's perhaps your modelling and your growth strategy has changed. Perhaps it hasn't. But what do you foresee for the organisation next? And secondly, the industry. I mean, HR has been under the microscope so much this year, in a good way. I think these challenges have really raised both technology and HR to the forefront of organisations, and shown that the people stream needs to be taken seriously to keep an organisation running successfully. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on on both the future of ANS and the future of HR.
Yeah, so I mean, from an ANS point of view, I'll go there first. I mean, certainly, we've tried to maintain the business as we go through, and as I say, put in a lot of things that make us better, and correct a lot of things, or improve a lot of things that, well, we've had the time to do that. And so I'm hoping from a structure point of view, where we were to where we are when we come out of it is in a better place. But then it's really supporting the market, and we've already looked at doing that. I mean, the market's in huge pain, the airport operators are in huge pain, and right now it's difficult because no one can see the end in sight. So I guess things are a little bit on hold. We just need to see what's going to happen, and how long this is going to last, and how long recovery is going to take, and is there going to be a second wave, etc., or are we in the second wave? So at the moment it's so much uncertainty still. It's difficult, but I think as we come out of that, the challenges that existed prior are still going to remain, and there was a worldwide shortage of air traffic controllers before we went into this. I think there will be as we come out of it. At the moment that's been eased because of the traffic volumes as they are, but as that builds again, that will come back. As I said earlier, the regulations are changing all the time, and we've had significant changes in the last year, both from an engineering point of view and an air traffic point of view, and the assets across most airports are aging. And so how we can support all of that at a time when cost pressures are so much higher, so bringing kind of innovative products to the market, and it's not, I don't mean products in terms of shiny things, I mean products in terms of services really, of how we can support airports through that. I think we really want to build ourselves into being someone that can help airports do that. But when you do things in-house, like the regional airports do, you have control of it, and outsourcing it feels like you're relinquishing control. And so it's building trust and making sure they understand that isn't the case, and we can here support them and give them access to things that maybe on their own they wouldn't have. And so that's what we'll try and do. And certainly we want to be a partner to the industry and support it through, and we believe we've got a big part to play in that. So that's probably from an ANS point of view. From an HR point of view, I mean, people are people still, so you've got to get the basic things right. You've got to manage them well, you've got to communicate with them well, and you've got to understand where they're coming from. And I don't think that changes regardless. I think this situation does change the way we work and view things, and how we work together. But ultimately, what drives people and engages people, I don't think will change from a fundamental level. I just think how we deliver it will be different. And so, embracing some of the changes that have been maybe forced on us, and looking at how they can work, but also making sure the safeguards are in place within that. I've been very mindful of people's well-being during this process. We've made the decision to go back temporary part-time to the office soon, and that's largely, we don't need to technically. We've operated fine without it, but I think that's largely a decision because we want people to have that back in their lives again, and be able to do that, especially with schools going back, etc. So I think how we do that is key, and how we embrace that change is key, but still being mindful of how people work and how they operate.
It's such an interesting time, and some people seem to almost be completely back. Some people are talking about either never going back or going back in 2022. We've returned ourselves a couple of days this week, and the learning has been huge. It's amazing how efficient you get at working from home, and then to suddenly find yourself surrounded by people with technology that you're not used to again. Do you know what I mean? I'm sort of almost a self-contained unit now with this laptop. I just feel I've been looking at this screen for 5 months, and to suddenly have a desktop and all this, it was silly little things, but it's a real difference. But it was great to be around people. So
I mean, we gave most of our staff took stuff home, so they've got their screens and their chairs and all the rest of it. So they did all that, and we can facilitate return to the office because we're only going to go back half of it. Otherwise, most of the equipment is in people's houses. But it's interesting, the shift. I know lots of managers prior to COVID, when they're talking about staff working from home, were wary about productivity and those kind of issues about people working from home. And actually, the experience we've had, certainly mine, is that I'm more concerned about people being slaves to their screen and never walking away from their desk and apologising because I've called them on Teams and they weren't there. I'm really sorry I wasn't at my desk. No, it's fine. You don't have to be at this. Get away from your desk. You would if you were at work. You'd get up, you'd have a coffee, and you'd go and chat to someone. It's no different. I don't want you tied to your screen between, God knows what hours and what hours. So it's actually that I think that's been proven, certainly in our business, that there's no question about people's productivity. It's more you've got to manage the other way to make sure that they're being sensible in what they do.
That's a really good point. And your office, I have to say, I've been to visit your site. What a location! That tower on the runway. I mean, it's just amazing. There's the first one of these I ever did was Fiona from EZEC Medical, and I had to drive through an airfield to get to her offices. And again, I was in heaven. Do you know what I mean? It was just having to stop so planes could cross the runway and then drive on. Yeah. It's just
it's interesting.
That's the novelty.
When you get your airport driving license and it's one thing being driven, it's another thing driving yourself. It's interesting when you first do it. But certainly the views are great. I mean, the view from Edinburgh Tower is fantastic. I don't know if this is the right thing to say, but the view from the 9th floor toilets of the tower, so you can stand at the urinal and have amazing view of the airport.
Is that right?
Best toilet views I've ever come across.
Look, there's that one. What's the other? The Shard, apparently.
Yeah,
that's another one.
Okay.
We'll have to. Well, this could be a regular feature, Peter. Right?
Toilets around the UK.
Is that right? Hey, I appreciate today is probably a very big day for you guys, because you're right. There were a lot of announcements about British tourists running to the airports to try and get back pre-quarantine from Croatia and a few other places. Thank you for giving me a bit of time. I could talk to you all day, because the subject matter around aviation and airports is just amazing. It's clearly something that runs through your career, but it's something you're very passionate about.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for the time, Simon. You take care.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot. Cheers, Peter.
Yeah.
All the best.